What happens when a pop icon and a late-night host go from playful banter to a full-blown confrontation that ends with security being called? Tonight, we're breaking down the jaw-dropping interview that had Gwen Stefani storming off the Tonight Show set, leaving Jimmy Fallon speechless and the audience in complete shock. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us whose side you're on in this clash, because trust me, you're going to have opinions. Now, let's dive in. The interview started innocently enough. Gwen Stefani walked out to thunderous applause, looking effortlessly cool in a black leather jacket and those signature red lips. Jimmy greeted her with his usual enthusiasm, that big smile plastered across his face as the band played her out. They hugged, she waved to the crowd, and took her seat on that familiar couch. Everything seemed normal, perfect even. "Gwen Stefani, welcome back to the show," Jimmy said, his voice carrying that trademark energy. "It's been too long. You look incredible as always." "Thanks for having me, Jimmy," Gwen replied, crossing her legs and settling into the couch. "It's good to be back." "So let's talk about the new music," Jimmy started, leaning forward with interest. "You've been teasing this album for months now, and fans are going crazy. What can you tell us about it?" Gwen's face lit up. "Well, it's been a really personal project for me. I poured a lot of myself into these songs. It's different from anything I've done before, more raw, more honest. I think people are going to connect with it on a deeper level." "That's amazing," Jimmy nodded enthusiastically. "And I heard you worked with some interesting producers on this one. Can you give us any names?" "I'd rather let the music speak for itself when it drops," Gwen said with a slight smile. "But yes, I collaborated with some incredible talent, people who really understood the vision." Jimmy chuckled. "Always keeping us in suspense. Classic Gwen." He shuffled his cards. "Now I have to ask, because everyone's been talking about it online, there's been some buzz about your tour venues. Some fans were disappointed about certain cities not being included in the lineup. What's your response to that?" Gwen's smile faltered just a fraction. "Well, you know, touring is complicated. You can't be everywhere at once. We tried to hit as many markets as possible, but logistics, venue availability, all of that plays a role." Sure, Jimmy said, nodding. "But some people felt like maybe the selection was a bit, I don't know, exclusive, like you were only focusing on the biggest markets." There was a pause. Gwen tilted her head slightly. "I wouldn't say exclusive. We made the decisions that made the most sense for the tour. It's not about excluding anyone, right? But when you're charging premium prices for tickets and only playing in major cities, it does kind of feel like you're catering to a specific demographic, doesn't it?" Jimmy's tone was still light, but there was something underneath it now. Gwen's posture shifted. "Jimmy, I think that's a bit of an unfair characterization. Artists have to make choices about where they perform. It's not personal." "I'm just saying what people online are saying," Jimmy replied, holding up his hands in a defensive gesture. "You know how Twitter gets." "Maybe we should focus on the music instead of Twitter drama," Gwen suggested, her voice maintaining its composure, but with a slight edge. Of course," Jimmy agreed quickly. "Speaking of drama, though, I saw you had some interesting comments about the music industry recently. You talked about authenticity and how some artists today are more focused on image than substance. That stirred up quite a conversation." "I stand by what I said," Gwen responded firmly. "The industry has changed. When I started, it was about the craft, about the music itself. Now, sometimes it feels like it's all about the algorithm, the viral moment, the aesthetic. I think that's worth talking about." Jimmy leaned back. "But isn't that a little, I don't know, judgmental? I mean, who's to say what's authentic and what's not? Maybe younger artists are just expressing themselves differently than your generation did." The word generation hung in the air. Gwen's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't think it's about generation, Jimmy. It's about integrity. But you've been in the game for what, 30 years now? Things change. Maybe what you see as lack of authenticity is just evolution." Jimmy's smile was still there, but it felt forced now. "Evolution is one thing," Gwen said, her voice cooling. "Watering down art for clicks is another." "That sounds pretty dismissive of an entire generation of artists," Jimmy pressed. "I mean, aren't you kind of gatekeeping what counts as real music?" "Gatekeeping?" Gwen repeated, her eyebrows raising. "I'm expressing an opinion based on decades of experience. That's not gatekeeping, that's observation. An observation that basically says new artists aren't as good as you and your peers were," Jimmy countered. The playful tone was gone now. "Some might call that bitter." The audience got quiet. You could feel the energy in the room shift. Gwen uncrossed her legs and leaned forward. Bitter? You think I'm bitter? I'm just pointing out how it might come across, Jimmy said, suddenly backtracking a bit. Look, I'm playing devil's advocate here. No, you're putting my words in your mouth, Gwen shot back. I never said new artists aren't good. I said the industry has changed its priorities. There's a difference. But you implied it, Jimmy insisted. When you talk about authenticity like it's something only your generation has, what else are people supposed to think? Jimmy, I don't know what your angle is here, but this isn't a debate, Gwen said, her voice rising slightly. You invited me on your show to talk about my album, not to defend myself against some twisted interpretation of my words. I invited you to have a conversation, Jimmy replied, his own tone sharpening. And part of that conversation is addressing what you put out there publicly. You can't make controversial statements and then act like surprised when people want to discuss them. Controversial? Gwen laughed, but there was no humor in it. Having an opinion about music is controversial? Now, when that opinion dismisses an entire wave of artists, yeah, it kind of is, Jimmy said. The audience was completely silent now, watching this unfold. Look, I respect your legacy, Gwen. Nobody's questioning that. But maybe, just maybe, you need to consider that your perspective isn't the only valid one. Gwen stared at him for a long moment. You know what, Jimmy? I came here in good faith. I thought we were going to have a fun interview, talk about music, share some laughs, but instead you turned this into some kind of interrogation where you're trying to paint me as some out-of-touch has-been who's bitter about new talent. And frankly, I'm not interested in participating in that. Nobody's calling you a has-been, Jimmy said quickly, realizing perhaps that he'd pushed too far. That's not what I meant at all. Then what did you mean? Gwen demanded, because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you had an agenda coming into this interview, like you wanted to provoke me. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jimmy shifted in his seat, his smile completely gone now. I'm doing my job, Gwen. I'm asking questions that my audience wants answers to. Gwen scoffed. Or you, because it seems pretty personal, Jimmy, and that's where things really started to unravel. Personal? Jimmy repeated, his jaw tightening. What are you talking about? Come on, Jimmy, Gwen said, her voice steady but sharp. You've been taking shots at me since I sat down. The tour venues, the authenticity comments, calling me judgmental. This isn't an interview. This is you trying to make me look bad. That's ridiculous, Jimmy fired back. I'm asking legitimate questions about things you've said publicly. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't say them. The audience gasped. A few nervous laughs broke out, but mostly there was just stunned silence. Gwen's face went from surprise to angry in an instant. Excuse me? Look, I'm sorry if you feel attacked, Jimmy said, though his tone didn't sound particularly apologetic. But you're a public figure. You put yourself out there. You don't get to cherry-pick what gets discussed. I'm not cherry-picking anything, Gwen snapped. I'm calling out the fact that you're being hostile for no reason. What's your problem with me, Jimmy? I don't have a problem with you, Jimmy insisted, his voice rising. I have a problem with the double standard. You get to criticize everyone else, the industry, other artists, but the second someone questions you, you can't take it. Questioning me is fine, Gwen said, her eyes flashing, but that's not what you're doing. You're twisting my words, putting me on the defensive, and acting like I'm some villain. For what? Ratings. Oh, here we go, Jimmy muttered, rolling his eyes. Everything is about ratings, right? God forbid I actually challenge a guest instead of just laughing at their stories and playing games. Challenge me all you want, Gwen said, her voice getting louder. But do it honestly, Jimmy. Don't misrepresent what I said to create drama. That's cheap, Jimmy. That's beneath you. Or at least I thought it was. Jimmy leaned forward, his face flushed. You know what? Maybe I am creating drama. Maybe that's because you came on this show with nothing interesting to say, except vague statements about your album and complaints about how the music industry isn't what it used to be. Maybe I'm trying to make this interview actually worth watching. The audience was dead silent now. You could hear people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Gwen's face went from surprise to angry in an instant. Wow, okay, so now my album isn't interesting. That's what this is about. I didn't say that, Jimmy backtracked, but the damage was done. Yes, you did, Gwen said firmly. You literally just said, I have nothing interesting to say. So let me ask you something, Jimmy. If I'm so boring, why did you book me? Why waste my time and mine? That's not what I meant, Jimmy replied, running his hand through his hair. You're twisting my words now. No, I'm repeating them back to you, and you don't like how they sound, do you? Doesn't feel great, does it? Jimmy's face darkened. This is getting ridiculous. Can we just move on? Move on to what? Gwen challenged. More loaded questions? More attempts to make me look out of touch? I don't think so. Then what do you want to talk about? Jimmy asked, frustration bleeding through every word, because clearly everything I bring up is wrong. I wanted to talk about my music, Gwen said, her voice controlled but fierce. The thing you just said wasn't interesting. I wanted to talk about the creative process, the messages in the songs, what this album means to me. But you weren't interested in any of that. You wanted conflict. I wanted honesty, Jimmy countered. I wanted you to actually engage, instead of giving me rehearsed responses and media-trained answers. But apparently that's too much to ask. Rehearsed responses? Gwen's voice went up an octave. Are you kidding me right now? I've been nothing but genuine since I sat down. You're the one who came in with an agenda. What agenda? Jimmy demanded. What possible agenda could I have? I don't know, Jimmy.